Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre. In early March 2020, as the shadow of the pandemic loomed large and uncertainty, financial and otherwise, was the order of the day, Yes Bank joined a long parade of banking and financial scandals arisen due to malpractice. Another one had seemingly bitten the dust when the moratorium on Yes Bank was imposed by the RBI. Journalist Furqan Mohar Khan had been following the story long before it broke, and his research is now the basis for the book The Banker Who Crushed His Diamonds. In conversation with Furqan today is editor Shreya Punj, and both of them will be taking us through what actually happened and how do we as citizens read the signs of impending disaster. Over to Shreya.
Thank you so much, Lekha. It's wonderful being here. And welcome, Furqan. So nice to be in this conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Shreya.
Okay, I'm going to go straight in and ask you the biggest question of all, which is what really happened at Yes Bank that led to its fall the last year?
So last year on March 5, RBI had to place a moratorium on Yes Bank. What essentially moratorium means is that depositors can't withdraw their money above a certain amount. In Yes Bank's case, it was fixed at 50,000 rupees for that period. For example, if moratorium starts today, for next 1 month, the depositors can't withdraw more than 50,000 rupees. So RBI had to place a moratorium and they had to supersede, basically sack the management of the board of directors of Yes Bank. So this was a situation that RBI had to deal with, and it was a bailout strategy that RBI had to adopt just from the brink of collapse. Now, the bigger question here is, why did the collapse happen? So collapse happened primarily because Yes Bank had a lot of unrecognized and unprovided for bad loans. Now, unprovided for bad loans are the kind of bad loans which the bank has not created provisions for till now. In case of Yes Bank, they were in excess of 18,000, 19,000 crores. Now, they had a situation in hand where they had to provide for those loans and recognize those loans. For providing for those loans, they needed further capital. Capital was not coming because Yes Bank's, if you look at the balance sheet of Yes Bank back then, the contingent liability was twice the size of the balance sheet. Now, contingent liability is an important term here. Contingent liability is an off-balance sheet item in any company's balance sheet, and it may or it may not arise in future. So nobody was willing, because of that huge sum of contingent liabilities in Yes Bank, nobody was willing to invest money in them. No big institutional investor. Another form they could have raised the capital was current accounts and the saving accounts. Now, current accounts and saving accounts are popularly known as CASA accounts. Now, CASA accounts are the cheapest form of capital for any bank, because the reason behind that is debt comes at more than 6 to 7% of interest rates. Fixed deposits come at interest rate more than 6 to 7%. So does equity. Equity comes at a higher interest rate. But these current accounts have 0 to 1% interest rate in India, and the saving accounts have less than 4% interest rate in India. So it was the cheapest form of the capital that they could have arranged for. Unfortunately, from October 2019 onwards, there was a run on the bank. The deposits were going out, the capital was not coming, and there was a huge bulk of bad loans that they had to account for. And that is where the liquidity and the solvency issues happened with the bank.
Okay, so from what I've understood is that the bank had many, many bad loans running up to almost 19,000 crore rupees. It did not have enough money with itself, nor could it raise enough money, which is why the government had to bail it out.
That is how it happened.
I mean, when the bank started, everything seemed so rosy. Take me back to that time. Who were the people who started Yes Bank? What was the original vision? And do you have an idea of where it went wrong or where it started going wrong?
I'll first start how the bank started. There were these two contemporaries when it comes to Indian banking in 1990s. There was this gentleman called Harkirat Singh, and he has a contemporary named as late Ashok Kapoor. Both of them were heads of different foreign banks at that point of time. Harkirat was head of Deutsche Bank in India, and late Ashok Kapoor was head of ABN AMRO in India. So they had started a plan to start a bank around 1996. They had this thing in mind because they were nearing a retirement. So they had planned to start a bank. And at the same time, Rabobank was scouting for opportunities in India. Rabobank is a Dutch entity. Now, late Ashok Kapoor happens to be the brother-in-law of Rana Kapoor, the man who's the center of our story. Late Ashok Kapoor introduced Rana Kapoor to Harkirat Singh, and they all three of them went and met Rabobank guys. So Rabobank, the things materialized, and they started with a non-banking financial corporation, in which Rabobank was the main partner and three other Indian partners, which includes Harkirat Singh, late Ashok Kapoor, and Rana Kapoor. They were the minor partners. The plan was let NBFC get going, then later on they will apply for the banking license in a couple of years. So the Indian partners would have a majority stake, while as the Rabobank will play a minority role. So in 2001, all three of them applied for a license and they got the license. But in 2003, there was an incident where Harkirat Singh had gone to Mauritius for a vacation with family. And that is where Rana Kapoor convinced Rabobank guys through various methods to oust Harkirat Singh from the business venture. So now after this, there were two Indian partners, Ashok Kapoor and Rana Kapoor and Rabobank. So that is how the bank, when it started functioning in 2004, after getting the in principle license for 3+1, they started on 2+1 ownership pattern in 2004. But the things, what you rightly asked, when did the things get messier? So in that case, we have to look into the personalities. While Ashok Kapoor was a more stable and more grounded guy, Rana Kapoor was a mercurial and over-ambitious guy. So the things started getting messier in 2008 when late Ashok Kapoor passed away unfortunately in the terror incident of 26/11. And that is where Rana Kapoor got the full control of the bank. And you had a situation where you had the promoter who was the MD and CEO and who had the power to elect the chairman of the bank. He was an all-powerful banker when it comes to Yes Bank. So Rana Kapoor started taking the full control of the things there. And that is when the things started getting messier that day onwards. Till 2014 and 15, the bank was involved into a legal battle with the next of kin of late Ashok Kapoor, because Rana was not letting them on the board of the bank as promised by the laws of the bank that they had agreed upon. But in 2015, the interest rates in India started coming down. And that is where Rana Kapoor started lending recklessly to the stressed companies. And that is where the financial problem started for the Yes Bank.
This picture that you've painted, that they started as three, where clearly Harkirat and the late Ashok Kapoor were seasoned bankers, and Rana Kapoor was at that point still much younger to them. To then, now when we're looking at in the last few years, where he assumed almost autocratic control of Yes Bank, it's very telling of the kind of personality he is. I mean, you seem to have a very good handle in terms of also knowing him. I mean, did you ever interact with him personally? And during the course of your research around Yes Bank and the many articles you filed around it, what is your take on the kind of personality Rana Kapoor has? And I'm discussing him specifically here because, he is the person behind the story.
Yes. See, Rana Kapoor, spoken to him multiple times. And what I realized that he's a smooth talker and he's very conscious of his image management. Rana Kapoor, over the years, he had a larger than life image. See, if you talk about between 2010 to 2018, we'll talk about that phase. We had people like Aditya Puri in the banking sector. We had people like Uday Kotak in the banking sector. We had Deepak Parekh in the financial sector. And none of them were covered as much as Rana Kapoor was covered. That shows his propensity to the image management. And his PR was in Hindi we put a charam sima pe. That is how he used to operate. And when it comes to his style of working, Rana Kapoor had a peculiar style of working, my way or highway. See, we can't blame the employees of Yes Bank for whatever happened at Yes Bank. Tell me one way they could have opposed a promoter who was also the CEO and MD of the bank and who had powers to elect the chairman. So board was under the control of a promoter who was also CEO and MD. So it was over centralization of power. And Rana Kapoor had a big drawback, and it can be a positive plus point also. He used to micromanage things. Imagine a situation when he started with Yes Bank, he spent 2 hours selecting tiles for his office personally, which could have been easily delegated.
So when you're talking about his propensity for image management and his deploying of, great PR, it makes me question, the governing Bank of India, which is RBI, they should ideally be immune to this kind of PR, right? They're looking at hard facts. They're looking at the bank's balance sheet, which you very rightly mentioned when you were answering my first question. So what was the RBI's role in getting up to speed with what was happening at Yes Bank?
Because RBI has 2 different roles there. One when they place the moratorium and one before that. And probably at the time of placing the moratorium, that was the best that they could have done. And let me not get into that. But before that, what did they do? And there are serious questions over it. I'll tell you why. Because the red flags on Yes Bank's asset book, which is their loan book, which is the money that lend. So there were questions over it right from 2015, when UBS had come up with a report questioning that lending. They were saying that 125% of Yes Bank's net worth is stuck up in companies which are stressed. So there was a red flag in 2015. Till 2018, Rana Kapoor stayed at the top of Yes Bank. What was RBI doing at that point of time? RBI was seeing the divergences. There were clear divergences. What RBI, basically divergence is something what RBI thinks, difference between what RBI thinks is the NPA of a bank and what bank thinks is the NPA of the bank. So the difference is called divergence. There were high divergences reported in 2017 and 18. But still Rana Kapoor got through till 2018 end. And then after that, in 2019, by September end, it was clear. Even to a small-time reporter like me, who sits out of Bangalore, the things were clear to me that bank is not getting money and the bailout is needed. And when I wrote that story that the bank is not getting money and bailout is imminent, the run on the bank had not started. The run on the bank started on 1st of October, while my story came out on 20th of September. So RBI could have acted the moratorium. I mean, if RBI had bailed out the bank 6 months before or 7 months before, a lot of inconvenience caused would have been saved. They would not have needed to place a moratorium there, or investors' wealth would not have been wiped off as much as it was wiped off in this thing, March 5 bailout.
So when you're saying inconveniences here, in this context, I'd like to ask what sort of inconveniences or what kind of difficulties while you were reporting did you encounter the common person, the common man on the road facing? Because it's not often that, a private bank goes into moratorium. And from what I recall, this made the headlines everywhere. This was grave news. After demonetization, this was one of the biggest hits on the financial system, and the way it impacted the end consumer. So what did you discover during your ground reporting on this?
I'll tell you a small example, personal example of the kind of inconveniences caused. So my brother back then worked for a firm which had a salary account in Yes Bank. His firm used to credit salaries on 5th of March, 5th of every month. So it was 5th of March when he was supposed to get the salary. Now see the situation here. 5th of March was the day when RBI placed moratorium on the bank at 8 p.m. at night. So my brother had got salary 2 hours before, and somehow I had an inkling that this thing is coming. So he was immediately withdrawing the salary. But all his colleagues who got the salary on that day, they would have waited for next morning to withdraw their salaries. No. And they were facing problems. The cash was running out of the ATMs. There was a queue. The collapse happened. The moratorium was placed at the middle of pandemic. A lot of people would need huge sums of money, above 50,000, above 60,000 for their medical expenses or emergency needs. And there was a lot of inconvenience caused while withdrawing that money. That was on the depositor side. But let me be fair and fair. Depositors in India have historically not suffered as much as the investors. Depositors are basically politically sensitive, middle class people who no government dares to upset. But investors are always taken for a ride. Now look at the situation for inconvenience caused to investors here. Because of what was happening at Yes Bank, because Rana Kapoor sold his shares, if you remember, in the beginning of October 2019. So investors lost 60,000 crore rupees in 1 year. And it included 16 lakh retail investors like you and me, who had parked less than 2 lakh rupees as their investment in Yes Bank. So middle class people suffered. And if you talk about 16 lakh people as a country, the retail investors of Yes Bank as a separate country, it would be 153rd largest country in the world out of 235 countries. And the amount of loss that they suffered, 60,000 crore rupees, if you talk about it as an economy across the globe, it would be 144th largest economy in the world out of 235 economies. So that was the impact that investors suffered in Yes Bank's collapse.
I want to now understand that we've seen that the collapse of the bank caused great inconvenience and great problems to the common person, including both investors and depositors. We're also seeing that Yes Bank wasn't the first, nor is it the last bank to have gone through this, because soon after we saw the
Lakshmi Vilas Bank.
Exactly. I mean, after this talk, it concerns me as a depositor as to what is going wrong with our banking system. What do you think are the problems that are currently plaguing our financial institutions? And what ideally is the role of the RBI in helping manage the situation so that, these sorts of occurrences don't happen in the future?
I mean, there are laws in our country which are very strict. I think India by far has one of the most strict financial when it comes to regulatory laws. I'm not talking about dealing with financial crimes, but regulating the financial entities. I think India has one of the best laws in the world. But the unfortunate problem has been the implementation of those laws. Now, if you talk about RBI's role in this, I have already told you how RBI behaved in all this fiasco. And 30 years before the Yes Bank scam happened, in 1992, there was a Harshad Mehta scam that took place. Back then in Harshad Mehta scam, if we see, RBI knew what was happening. Still, it did not act. In case of Yes Bank scam, RBI knew what was happening and still it did not act till the mess got real. So it makes me more and more ponder on that joke that I always crack, that RBI should rename itself as Reactive Bank of India, since they always react only. There is no proactive action by RBI. What we need is a proactive regulator, which we saw during Urjit Patel's tenure. We need a proactive regulator. We need financial awareness in the country. The financial awareness is very low. The customers and the depositors never ask questions from the bank or the financial institution or the brokerage that what is the logic behind whatever they are asserting while selling a scheme or a deposit scheme or a stock they are trying to sell them. There are little questions asked. And this is not only at the level of retail investors. In fact, even the high net worth individuals do not ask for the rationale behind the investments that they are making and their brokerages are pitching to them.
Noted. So how do you as a depositor, as somebody who's so financially literate, what are the tips and tricks you can give to someone like, say, perhaps me, in terms of increasing my financial literacy? I mean, you've said that ask questions, but is there any resource I can go to or any questions I can perhaps pick up the phone and call up my bank and ask? How do you think a common person can increase their financial literacy?
So RBI's website has all the details that what you should and you should not do. RBI's website says it all. But the problem is the people are not reading it. People should read more about it. And when people are trying to sell something to you, financial institutions, see, your broker tells you, we are expecting this stock to go from this price to this price. So you invest in this stock. The next question from you should be, can you show me the research report which is backing your assertion to the broker? at least have a look at the research report. What research report says? Why are they saying that this stock will grow from this to this position? So you should be asking for the documents backing things. Then again, you should also look at the legal options available for you in case you feel cheated or aggrieved. See, RBI has a bank's ombudsman in every city. How many people go to the ombudsman for their grievances? You and me are not the only people. There is a common friend of yours and mine. Her uncle's account recently got frozen because bank unilaterally decided to basically renew their KYC, know your customer norms. And the customer was not informed in such case. The next step ideally should be to inform the ombudsman that bank has done this thing. Raise the issue with the bank. If bank you're not satisfied with the bank's reply, go to the ombudsman. And ombudsman is there to sort those kind of issues. So you should be legally aware of your rights. You should be asking for the documents backing your assertion. You should be reading more. These are the 3 mantras.
I mean, I think that's excellent advice. And I, for one, will definitely try and ask more questions and read up more about my rights going forward. So, Furqan, you're a reporter. You've seen it all. You've covered a lot on this beat. While researching on the Yes Bank fiasco, you also told us that, Rana Kapoor was a man who effectively ran a PR machinery and was a bit smart about, what kind of issues was he letting out, what his persona was. I want to know, when you were researching for both the book and during the course as a reporter for Deccan Herald, did you at any point face any problems or any threats or, any issues? Because we often see in movies and in shows that, journalists often face the ire of the subject whom they're doing reportage on. Do let us know if that's something you also faced.
So basically, yeah, there are a lot of problems, perils with investigative reporting. So I classify it as an investigative reporting. You are just going against the system there. RBI doesn't want things to come out. Had they wanted the things to come out, they would have said it in black and white long before the mess got real. The bank would never say that they're getting into mess. In turn, what they are trying to do, they try to kill my stories many a times. In fact, Yes Bank, I received a lot of legal notices, and a lot of time was wasted on answering those legal notices. Although I knew that my stance was right, but then I had to, because I had to abide by the law. So I had to answer to those legal notices, and it wasted a lot of my time and energy. And there is a mental toll it takes. But at the end, you feel vindicated when the things come out true. And that is what I would suggest all the journalists to do. I mean, covering the planted stories might get you the goodwill of the sources, but it won't get you the goodwill of the masses. That is what the journalist's primary focus should be, public interest. And that is where they're losing out when they do such kind of stories which are planted in nature.
That's essential for news coverage anyway. And this is one of the reasons why I also subscribe to certain news channels only, who I feel are doing actual reportage rather than just covering, PR planted stories. I'm going to come to the last question that I have for this session for you, Furqan, which is, what is the thought behind the title of the book? Because I've seen a lot of people on Twitter talking about it as to what this really means, the banker who crushed his diamonds. And I'd be really happy for you to explain to our audience, our listeners, as to, what was your reasoning behind it?
The reasoning behind, if you remember when Rana Kapoor was forced to step down by RBI in late 2018. So he put out in his Twitter that my Yes Bank shares are invaluable to me. They are like diamonds, and diamonds are forever. I will never sell even a part of them. And 12 months later, exactly 12 to 14 months later, he had sold all of those shares. And he was left with only 900 shares in Yes Bank, which is even lesser than any retail shareholder. So basically, he's the banker who crushed his diamonds. And he compared it to diamonds, and diamonds are something, real diamonds, they will never be broken. When you talk about real diamonds, it is only the diamond has to be fake to be crushed. And that is what happened in case of Yes Bank. The dimes were sold as diamonds at the end of the day for the retail investors. So there are multiple metaphors to this title that we talk about.
I think that's a great insight into the title, and it also sort of tells the more nuanced reader as to what the book has in store for them. Thank you so much, Furqan, for doing this session with me. It was really, really insightful, and I hope our listeners also enjoy your take on Yes Bank.
Thank you so much, Shreya.
Thank you for listening in till the end. Please share this episode with a friend on social media, WhatsApp, or anywhere else. It would mean the world to us. And in case you're listening via iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and a review. Subscribe to BIC Talks on email or your favorite podcast app and don't miss out on future episodes. This episode of BIC Talks has Gaurav Krishna as our sound engineer with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Lekha Naidu. And the accompanying episode artwork was made by Chandni Venkataraman.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BIC Talks. This podcast can be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org, as well as on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Tune in for new episodes every week, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages to stay informed on our latest updates.